Hi, I'm Jenny Rae, the Managing Director of Management Consulted, and I'm here today to talk a little bit about the all-important case interview prep process. This is your complete guide to case interview prep. First of all, when do you start prepping for the case interview? Our recommendation is 6 months in advance. And in the best case scenario, you're going to work through multiple different pieces of the prep process. You're going to go through a diagnostic interview. You're going to break everything down. You're going to dig into a lot of the issues that you might have. You're going to put it all back together, and you're going to do all of this in a very systematic way. We recognize that a lot of you are going to be coming to us and binge watching YouTube videos 3 days before your interviews. So let me just speak to you. What do you need to do if you're prepping right away? You need to come through those very same diligent processes incredibly quickly. So you need to start with a diagnostic interview. Then you need to practice sections of the interview, even if it feels like it's time inefficient and you're too close to the interview. On your third day beforehand, you need to break down the interview and make sure that you've got all the component pieces just right. And then just before the interview, you need to pull everything back together. So even if you're working in a compressed time frame, that's our recommendation. In addition, the prep process really can take longer than 6 months if you have absolutely no business background and you want to weave in some practical experience to build in tools for yourself so that you can refer to them inside the interview. The second piece that's really important to understand is how to prepare. There are two main ways that are effective for preparation. Number one, audio review. You can listen and watch other people doing case interviews. When you're listening to them and you're watching them happen, you get a sense for how the nuances of the flow works, for how the back and forth should be working, for when you should be driving and when you should be receiving. If you don't get that and you're just reading the interviews, it seems like a much more static question and answer process. So understanding from the beginning the way that the conversation naturally flows is really critical. And again, you can do that through audio resources, or you can watch, for example, YouTube videos on case interviews. Then after you've absorbed some information, or potentially even before, you need to make sure that you yourself are practicing out loud. Because again, just reading something or going through it in isolation does not give you the simulation for what you'll need to go through the interview. So if you have a long period of time, we recommend that you do a diagnostic interview to start with so that you know where you should be focusing, and then use your audio practice to build up some skills as you are working through your own processes. If you have a very limited amount of time, we recommend that you flip that, watch a few videos, listen to some audio, then dive straight into the practice. Now, let's talk a little bit about the structuring process. When you're going through the beginning of a case, the most critical piece is building a good structure at the beginning. And it's critical for two reasons. Number one, in many of the situations, like a BCG or a Deloitte case, you'll actually use that structure to solve the case. So it's important for your ability to complete the task that you have. But for cases where you're maybe not using that structure exactly, like a McKinsey case, it's also really important to communicate that you have the ability to structure a work plan effectively. How do you build a structure? Well, first of all, you need to make sure that you have isolated categories. 4 categories is our recommendation. Second, you need to make sure that you're drawing on practical experience. It's really important to the interviewer that every structure does not sound the same to one another from case to case, and that every person's structure does not sound the same because you are relying on your own personal experience. And in addition, you need to make sure that your structure is prioritized because you may use it to solve the case. And even if you don't, what they want to see from you is that you can, out of the sea of data that you could collect, identify the keys that you'll really need to solve the case. Which brings me to my last point of the structure section. Every line in your structure, outside of the category headings, needs to be data-driven. And there's a reason for that. Because step number 4 of case practice is making sure that you ace the math. And the one way you can make sure from the beginning that you ace the math is identify the data that you'll need to solve the problem. When you're working through the math, there are other things that you need to keep in mind. First of all, follow the data, not your structure. So even if you came up in the beginning with some great ideas for how to structure the case, you need to make sure that you are identifying inside the case what data is available to you. That's going to be a hint that it's the key to an insight, because data is only going to be brought into the case if there is an insight there. In addition, you need to make sure that you spend 5 minutes working through the math portions of the case and that you use our 4 recommended steps. First, you recap the problem. Second, you structure the math and you explain verbally what you're about to do. Third, you solve the math. And fourth, you come up with insights. And then finally, make sure that you practice all 3 types of math verbal math, chart math, and graph math. If you're able to do all of those, you're going to be adequately prepared for the math portion inside the interview. And one final note about that, just a little tip or hint, we do recommend a minor amount of rounding to help facilitate speed in the math, but ultimately speed is not the most important thing. The level of your insight is important. And when we're training people, especially if they have a good bit of time before the interview, we actually recommend that they don't do any rounding. We look for exact numbers to build confidence in that ability. The final piece that's important to understand when prepping for the case interview is how to conclude, how to build a recommendation at the end. One thing that's really important to note is we've seen this in multiple parts of our practice and in our seminars, is that people are reluctant to make conclusions without perfect data. That's not what they're looking for from you. You need to know from the beginning that they're looking for a yes or a no answer, a do this, a don't do that. They're looking for a clear recommendation, even if it's based on limited data. And you can put in your next steps of the recommendation what else you would like to do to verify where you are, but it's really critical that you put all of that together. There's so much more that we could say and do say about case interviews in our other videos, as well as our case interview course. And we would love to work with you to prepare for your case interview. Just visit us on social or at managementconsulted.com.